Tonight, I am going to talk about Chapter 7 of Interconnected. This chapter is titled Authentic Freedom. To begin with, freedom is a word that is used a lot and that it's also frequently misunderstood. He uses the example of demonstrating for freedom, fighting for freedom, begging for freedom. You could just turn on the evening news and you get more different versions of freedom. So he defines some of the popular meanings of freedom as doing whatever you want at any given moment. And another that Karmapa uses is having the power and the right to do whatever you want. And another is freedom to be able to drop your obligations towards other people. And it is seeing that these obligations towards other people limit our freedom, or else we have the freedom to drop the obligations regardless whether they limit our freedom or not. All of these are based on this false idea of a separate, self-sustaining self entity, an ego, a soul, and so forth, that there's no interdependence, that they are unique and not affected by other people and other beings. Then the question is that he brings up is how much freedom is enough? And that our connections to other people, especially distant connections, whether they be on the other side of the globe or just people that we feel distant from that just might be living down the block from us, those connections can feel limiting. And from an egotistical point of view, the attitude is, I'm most important, or my group is most important. And of course, this leads to the lack of freedom for others. It leads to domination, discrimination, oppression from a local scale to a global scale. And it also leads to thinking that freedom is a limited resource. It's what could be called a zero-sum game, that the freedom that I gain is at your expense, or the freedom that you gain is at my expense. This is a total misunderstanding of what freedom really is. These are mistaken self-interests for freedom. Being free of consequences or responsibilities actually leads to a very cold, calculating approach to life. It's isolating. So that the type of authentic freedom Gyalwang Karmapa is talking about is this interdependence that we have with each other, with the environment, with animals, with the world, and that we need to have an authentic view of ourselves and our connections to have this type of authentic freedom. Quote, if we acknowledge our interdependence and take into account the vast network of interconnections in which our lives and our actions are embedded, we will find that our own freedom is inseparable from the freedom of all other people. In Tibetan Buddhism, and this comes from the Hindu tradition actually, there is this metaphor of the net of Indra. And of course, it's a vast net, and each knot is connected to other knots through the connecting twine. So every knot in this vast net is connected to every other knot in the net. So this is a more traditional approach to this idea of interconnection. The next section here is titled Freedom's Inner Conditions. So there are inner and outer conditions for authentic freedom, and the interconnections are the basis, that we don't have outer freedom without the inner conditions for freedom. The outer manifestations of freedom are based on this inner conditions. To begin with, our minds have unlimited potential. They have no limits. From the Buddhist point of view, our mind has no center, it has no edge. And we can look at this from very different perspectives, or a very different variety of perspectives. We can experience freedom even under very challenging outer conditions if we have the inner resources that help us feel free. If we have this access to the inner freedom, we can have authentic freedom. I received an email this afternoon from a man that I know who is a Buddhist in a different tradition. And he was saying that his mother fell and as a result was hospitalized and then went into care, and that he had to go out and tend to her needs and be a caregiver. And he said, well, one door closed and another door opened. And that's kind of this freedom that Karmapa is talking about. He went to the eastern part of the state, and he had never done this before, but he started volunteering in some prisons out there as a Buddhist volunteer. So then a second door opened for him that was related to his mother falling. She's still alive, and I think she's recovering. But anyway, these outer conditions and liberties are important, but it is the inner factors that actually produce lasting happiness. The outer ones, it's always temporary. If we don't really pay attention, we will find that we are bound by our conflicting emotions, our habitual patterns, and we're always trying to establish territory and feel secure and so forth. And that, of course, is not freedom. This inner freedom allows us to work with our external conditions. We might think, or others might think, limit our freedom. And we might think that they limit the freedom of others. Again, genuine happiness is internal, and it is not dependent on external factors. Very simply, if you're not happy before you get what you want, you won't be happy afterwards, at least not for very long. And then you're going to be seeking happiness somewhere else. The internal approach, here is a quote of Karmapa's: if we feel free, we feel happy. And if we feel happy, we feel free. That's pretty simply stated. So they're just two different ways of looking at a similar experience, that it's both internal and it's the mind that experiences them. So this is where freedom starts. It starts with our minds, and it starts with working with our minds. Karmapa talks about faulty expectations about freedom that we need to work with. One is removing ourselves from connections and responsibilities towards others. And the reason why this is faulty is that these connections are part of who we are, and we can never be completely successful. I don't care how hard you try. When I moved out to my present place back in 1971, there were a lot of people that moved out here to get back to the land, and I kind of had that motivation too. I grew a lot of food and so on and so forth, but the bottom line is that somebody had to produce the seeds unless you produce them yourselves. And there are millennia of people that have cultivated these seeds and bred them and so on and so forth. And then the same thing would go for crops, the machinery that you use to grow the crops, the tractors, the tractor machinery. And then there was the land, and on and on and on. It was impossible to really be self-sustaining. You would always be connected in some way or another. You breathed the same air as everybody else, drank the same water, walked on the same earth, had the same climate, cold, hot, rain, snow, and so forth. The other faulty expectation about freedom is that you can control others and external circumstances. And I think this is very appropriate. My mind went to a poem. It's titled Ozymandias, and it's about Ramses II, I believe, this great Egyptian pharaoh. So I'll read, we'll do a poetry reading here. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. No thing besides remains. The round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So I think that states pretty well this idea of trying to control, that it's impossible no matter how mighty you are. Now, the Tibetan word for freedom uh, literally means, according to Karmapa, self-control or self-mastery. And he quotes a Tibetan saying, quote, being in control of oneself is happiness. Being controlled by what is other is suffering. Self-control brings happiness. Without it, we are controlled by outer forces. Usually we aren't even aware of being controlled. Again, that reminded me of when I was working in the prison. Part of my job, a big part of my job, was to bring in volunteers from the various religious traditions to work with inmates, lead services, give teachings in their tradition, and so forth. And related to that, then with new volunteers, I would have to give them orientation and kind of teach them about the rules and also try to instill in them a little caution when working with the inmates, because some inmates would be very good at manipulating. So I would tell them, if an inmate can control your emotions, they can control you. So I'm bringing this up because to have freedom, we need to examine how companies, advertisers, how people, organizations try to control us and other people through emotions, especially fear. If any outside force can control our emotions, they can control us. And so we really have to work with our afflictive states of mind. We really have to be careful. It's easy to see it in other people, but we have to really look within. It doesn't do us much good to see it in other people and start pointing fingers. So a lot of things, a lot of strategies that people resort to, you might say, work with fear and their afflictive states of mind. I'm just going to mention a few here: shop till you drop, or anxiety attacks, or self-loathing. We need to be free of all of this if we're really going to be free on the inside. And I will make a confession here. Sometimes I was thinking when I was working on my shop that it was shop until I drop, but I'm still standing. Anyway, we can lose our freedom in many ways when these external circumstances change, if our mind is unstable. Karmapa says that we need to use at least an understanding of our Buddha nature, our primordial purity, as a starting point to train our mind to be patient. We need to understand that our ultimate nature is limitless potential, beyond good and bad, beyond born and dying, and so forth. That if we can understand that and then start to work with our destructive emotions, gradually we will liberate ourselves. I have here in my notes a brief review of these afflictive states of mind and their problems. So anger is a desire to get away from the unpleasant, and if not getting away from it, to destroy it. You become preoccupied by it. You're constantly thinking about it, and you can't be happy. And you may even know that, but you can't let go of it. Try as you may, you can't let go of it. That it's so easy to be angry and not be able to just let go of the anger. You just carry it around with you. Desire is wanting to experience, to own, to possess. And it could be all kinds of things. It could be people, objects, ideas, knowledge, experiences. You see what you don't have, and you don't see what you do have. And if you don't see what you do have, you can't enjoy it. I am reminded of kids at Christmas time. Christmas tree is set up, there's presents under the Christmas tree, and now it's time to open the presents. And of course, the 5-year-old is all excited. Maybe there's a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old with the 5-year-old. And they gets a present, opens it up, looks at it, sets it down, gets another one, opens it up, looks at it, sets it down. Finally, all the presents are opened, and then the child looks at the parents and says, "Is that all?" That's what desire is like. Ignorance is willfully turning a blind eye. It's denial. It's concentrating on trivial matters so you can avoid the important ones. In a way, it's purposely forgetting, which seems like an oxymoron. There have been a lot of depositions and trials and hearings past few years. I won't even have to go in why, but it's amazing how often "I can't remember" comes up. I can't remember. Anyway, all of this causes stress, mental turmoil, emotional and physical health problems. You've lost your freedom, your suffering is increasing. It's avoidable. So this is a futile way to attain freedom. So now the next section is the benefits of self-discipline. Self-mastery involves self-discipline. And discipline in Buddhism is used frequently very different than it is in other places, that it's not about force, punishment, coercion. Discipline is refraining from harming yourself, refraining from harming others. It's actively doing things that benefit yourself and others. It involves having a joyful mind rather than one that is filled with the idea of, "Oh, I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but if I don't do it, I'll be punished," or I'll da 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 da. The way to accomplish this is mind training, training the mind to be self-disciplined. And it requires our mind to open up, that our mind is, again, as I said, because of Buddha nature, it's limitless, it's beyond boundaries. But it's so easy for us to close our mind down. We put up barriers and don't want to go beyond them because it feels safer. I saw a bumper sticker once. I think it was a university professor that had it on their car. And it said, "The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open." And I think that's a good bumper sticker, something good to think about. We have to consciously choose to open up our mind, to see things in new ways. We live in a very small world that we have created, and it feels secure. It can feel familiar. It can be painful even. In fact, it frequently is painful, but it's familiar. The pain is familiar. And going beyond the boundaries of our little world brings up all kinds of fear. And actually, one of the Tibetan words for bodhisattva is pawo. and it means warrior, not in terms of making war, but not giving in to fear. This means going beyond what's going on in our lives, going beyond what's inside of our minds, and opening up to the external world. To the traditional Tibetan example would be like looking from the top of a mountain down versus looking at the bottom of a narrow valley. A more modern analogy would be like a drone view, an aerial view. The point is that you see a much broader perspective. You zoom out. Maybe that's a good way to put it. And you're not so attached. You don't feel so claustrophobic. We need to remind ourselves that no one else is in control of our minds, that we are the ones that control it, and that we are capable of being in control. The next section is called Abundant Freedom, just abundant freedom and happiness. This inner freedom is not shallow. It's not just following impulses or letting go of following rules. Quote, freedom is rooted in wisdom. It involves an intelligent application of discernment conjoined with a sense of contentment, the ability to appreciate what we already have. And that's a very important point. Again, if we're busy trying to accumulate more things, we're missing what we have, and we actually have a lot. And this is contrary to the idea that freedom is based on an independent, self-contained individual. We need to realize that our actions of body, speech, and mind influence others, and that our well-being is influenced by other people. And we can have a positive influence on other people. We are in so many different relationships with other people and other communities, whether it be family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, city, county, school district, all the way up to we're all citizens of the world. We're all human beings. Our influence might seem inconsequential, like, what difference does it make? But if we really look at it closely, I think a good way to look at it would be the ripple effect. That if you smile at somebody, perhaps they will smile at somebody that they wouldn't have ordinarily. If you greet somebody warmly, maybe they will greet somebody warmly. If you avoid using harsh words, maybe they will be a little less edgy. We have that ability to influence people in a positive manner. And happiness, it's circular. It circulates. When we send out positive feelings, we feel better for having done it. If you don't believe me, just try it. And then as an experiment, go grouch. See how you feel. So why not influence people in a positive manner? it frequently comes back with interest, that what we get is much more than what we give. I've heard this in many different situations. I think that line is in one of the Beatles songs. I can't think of which one it is right now, but this is not particularly the subject of Buddhism alone. So, with wisdom, we can make better choices easier. And then, of course, the consequences pile up, the positive consequences. And there are many ways to be happy. There's not just one way to be happy. Again, I'm going to talk about myself here a little bit. When I moved out here, and almost immediately we started owning horses. And then, of course, when you own horses, you've got to make sure they have water. In the wintertime, you've got to feed them. And then in the summertime, you've got to make hay. So you've got hay to feed them in the wintertime. You've got to trim their hooves. You've got to comb out their mane, get the burdocks out of their mane, and gotta take them to the vet or bring the vet out to them, and yada, yada, yada. Then there's the manure that you've got to clean up. And eventually I had an idea, and that was sell the horses, that there are easier ways to be happy. I haven't had a horse since then. So it might be good to, just examine your life and see, am I doing a lot of things to be happy that are just really more work than they are happy? This is something that I noticed about the Tibetans, that the Americans, they work during the week and then they take the weekend off. The weekend is a vacation. And what I would see when I first started going out to KTD, there were more Tibetans there. And the Tibetans were playful when they worked. The work, play, there was really not much difference. I remember it was in 1999. I went to Tibet for the first time, and we were in Lhasa, and we went to this one monastery. I can't tell you which one it was, but the local people were repairing the roof. And there, the roofs are flat. So what repairing the roof was is they mixed up clay and gravel and a little water to make it stick, make it soft and pliable. And then they would have some people that would do that, bring it up to the roof. They would spread it out on the roof. And then you had people that had these poles with a donut-shaped rock at the bottom of the pole, and they're tamping it. But they didn't just tamp it, they sang and danced while they tamped it. So they were working, but they were playing. Instead of looking at work as drudgery, enjoy your work and then enjoy the weekend too. It might take a little bit of work on your mind to be able to do that, but it's amazing what can be done if you have a more positive state of mind. When I worked at the prison, I had written set of duties, but I felt morale was part of my duties. And so at Christmas time, I would put on a Santa hat to work, and I would say, I'm the Jolly Llama, ho, ho, ho. And got a few COs, correction officers, to almost buckle over laughing. Why not? Have fun. I remember going over to this one church, this one Christian church, sent in a bunch of Christmas cards. So my job was to distribute them to inmates that were in segregation in little cells. And I went over there with my Santa hat and ho, 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 here's a Christmas card. And well, I got some rude gestures and comments from a few. But most of the men, it kind of cheered them up. I do remember, here's a funny story, that the other chaplain, there were two levels. I was on the lower level, the other chaplain was on the second level. And one inmate said, "Well, where's Chaplain Olson?" And he went like this. And he said, "Oh." I said, "No, no, no, he didn't die." But anyway, have fun at work. So here is a quote: "Neither freedom nor happiness is dependent upon enjoying one's particular set of external conditions or having one particular experience. Freedom and happiness as opportunities are not one fixed thing." So there's lots of opportunity. So the opposite is true too. If your mind is not free, if wisdom is absent, there's limitless opportunities to be unhappy and to be bound. On the other hand, here, I don't know if he used this example or if this is my example, but I have here the example of buying online. You never see a person, you never contact a person. It's all done through the digital world. And frequently, you don't even see the delivery person. Yet your order affects lots of people around the world, and it affects the environment. And the cumulative action of all of us people that buy on the internet have a tremendous effect. You feel like you're independent, but if you really look at it, that you're not. These internet sites, they do marketing. I buy a lot on Amazon. I'm not plugging them, but when you enter a particular category, the first ones that come up are all paid advertisers. I call that marketing. Life is full of choices. Just one day is full of choices. Our future is full of choices, and the future is in the choices that we make in the present. It's in the present where we make choices that influence where we will be in the future, where the world will be in the future, where others will be in the future. So we need to have an open heart and an open mind for these choices to appear. So he says, what attitude do you want to have when you're making these choices? When you're looking for choices? Of course, a well-trained mind can make better choices than one that is wild. And as I began talking about this Buddhist that said that the one door closed and others opened up, that if we keep our minds open, we can see opportunities, lots of different opportunities arise. When you're feeling discomfort or uncomfortable, maybe even some fear, if it feels uncertain, that means you've got an opportunity because this is unknown territory. This isn't a very Buddhist saying, but I remember, I think it was Pat Brady who worked closely with Roy Rogers, the singing cowboy. And he made a lot of money as the singing cowboy. I think he bought up a football or a baseball team in California. And Pat Brady said this about him once, that when the wolf came to the door, Roy got a fur coat. Now, again, it doesn't sound very Buddhist, but this is an analogy. So when things can look very bad, This is really an opportunity. And if you can look at it as an opportunity, you might be surprised how stumbling blocks become stepping stones. Mingyur Rinpoche said this about his father, who was a great incarnate Lama too, that, quote, when you're walking on a path and come to a wall, throw your backpack over first. Because, of course, then you have to get over the wall. You are highly motivated to get over that wall or around the wall or under the wall to get your back passed. We need to have wisdom to kind of stretch beyond where we would normally comfortably go. And Karmapa says that wisdom is like an open heart. With compassion and love, all of us can work together to create authentic freedom. We are interdependent beings, and that all of our experience, all human experience, occurs in this context of interdependence. This I really want to stress, and that is we need to take others into account. Freedom means to understand our equality, not our supremacy. This is a little editorial comment here, but right now it seems like not giving a darn about what other people think or how your actions affect other people in a negative way seems to be spreading and very popular. We, of course, have to take into consideration other people's feelings and realize that their feelings are important too. This means that sometimes we have to deal with difficult people, work with difficult people, be around difficult people, because they might not be feeling the same way we do about wanting to take other people's feelings into consideration. So it's really important to be respectful, to be considerate of others, and especially those that we have an aversion for. Disregarding others will contradict this idea of equality and interdependence. It sometimes means that you've got to do something else as opposed to what you really want to do. Karmapa says if you have contentment, it's not a problem. You can change your plans and still be happy. And this is something I noticed right away when I got involved in Buddhism, is that these teachers frequently change plans quickly. For them, it's not a problem. There's plan A, there's plan B, there's plan C, and then there's a plan you haven't even made yet. No problem. Just be flexible. So having these interconnections will allow us to have this flexibility, give us this discernment, empathy, openness, patience. This is a good one. I will say this in Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's Dharma Paths, he talks about the 6 perfections, and the most pages are about patience. He talks about patience more. There are more words about patience than any of the other perfections. So we need to work on all of these: patience, wisdom, discernment, empathy, contentment. And it's worth it, because this is how we will become free and we will become happy. This will help us overcome our search for momentary gratification. The question is, would you talk a little bit more? If they can control your emotions, they can control you. So now with inmates, what came to my mind that really jumped out was this was maybe 5 years after Hurricane Katrina. And this one inmate had this really sad story about how he and his family were in New Orleans when that hit. And the only thing was that with different volunteers, the story was different. So he was obviously using it to manipulate the volunteers. And if the volunteer would start feeling sorry for the inmate, then they might ask the volunteer to do something that was illegal, or at least the volunteer would develop this emotional relationship that was not professional. So this is how it could lead to a problem in a prison situation in terms of, let's just bring up politics, which is I probably shouldn't bring up, but so much of it is fear-based right now. I had a conversation with the widow of one of my favorite cousins recently, and I hadn't talked to her for a couple of years, and she really likes Trump. Well, I tried to be very tactful. She said, well, if Biden gets elected, it's the end of America. And I didn't ask her why. But then I said, well, and I didn't talk about other than Trump, other than, well, there's some ethical issues here. I'm not trying to get in a fight here, but I had to say something. And so I just very gently talked that there's some ethical issues here and let it go at that. And she did say, well, I guess you're right. And we just left it at that and went on talking about other things. But there's so much fear right now that if you do this, if you vote for this person, the whole world falls apart. You vote for that person, the whole world falls apart. Well, it controls, you vote on the basis of fear, and someone's controlling your emotions. Advertising. It's amazing how good you can look if you supposedly buy a certain product. They usually don't have old, withered women and men advertising these products. Anyway, just so much of it is marketing based on emotional things. We're getting educated by people that have PhDs in marketing and psychology and so forth. So we really have to be careful of our emotional reaction to what we see, what we hear, what we read, and so forth.